Hey guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us again for one of our devotionals. I hope this blesses you. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening to our podcast, you guys are awesome. And I want to kind of continue what I've been talking about and going into staying committed to the will of God for our life. Because we've laid some foundation with earlier podcasts and earlier things we've done on how to be led by the will of God, how to be led by God, how to understand if you are in His will, how to understand if you're not in His will, and all that kind of stuff. And now I want to talk about being committed to His will. That means you know what His will is, you know what His known will is, the will of God in the Bible that you can read. You've been given clear direction from God to do something specific. So now we've got to make sure we stay committed to what God has called us to do, that we stay committed to His will for our lives. 1 Corinthians 9:25-27 says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives a prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it." So that's kind of talking about staying committed. We've got to understand that if we want to win this race, if we want to win this prize, we have to stay committed. We have to run. If you stop halfway through the race, you're never going to get it done. It's never going to be fulfilled. It won't be accomplished because you stopped and you've given up. Don't do that. Make sure you tell yourself, if you're listening, tell yourself, say this with me, I will stay committed to God's will for my life, and make that a pledge. Make that something that you say in your heart that you're like, I'm going to do this. I will stay committed to God's will for my life, because if you don't, you won't be able to obtain that prize. You won't be able to walk into the fullness that He has for you. And it says, and everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but for we, an imperishable crown. So Paul's using the example of running a race. He says those who win, the naturally, if you run a race and you win a trophy, well, that's perishable. It might be cool, it might be fun, but it's not going to last forever. But what we're running for, when we follow the will of God for our life, it's going to be eternal. It's going to have eternal impact. It's going to impact not only our lives, but people around us. It'll impact their lives as well, because that's how God is. He's a big God who has big plans and a big will to accomplish and see a lot done, to see His glory manifest on the earth. And we do that by staying committed to the will He has for us. So that's what it talks about. It says, therefore, run with this, not with uncertainty. So we've got to make sure that we can learn to trust God and trust His will for our life. Because Paul said we need to run, but don't run, don't have uncertainty when you're running this race. Don't have uncertainty when you said, I'm going to commit myself to the will of God. You've got to be certain. You've got to have that faith. You've got to have that inward knowing on the inside of you, like, I know this is God's will and I'm not going to back off. And, the big way to do that, the Bible tells us in Proverbs 3:5, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on our own understanding. So we've got to get to the place that we can trust God and we can trust His will for our life. We've got to understand and come to a place that when God asks us to do something, when He leads us to do something or leads us to change or whatever, that we need to know that it's the best possible thing that could ever happen. Because we know that God's will, God's plans for our lives are good and they're perfect, And we've got to come to the place where we know that ourselves and we can trust in Him, And a good way to learn how to trust in God's will is to understand His love for you. So if you understand He loves you, then you know that He's not going to ask you to do anything that's going to hurt you. He's not going to ask you to do anything that's going to destroy you. He's only going to ask you to do things that He can make His glory manifest, that will cause you to grow, that will build your character, and that will fulfill the call that He has on your life. So we've got to learn to trust in God. And a big thing, too, is understanding that we've got to trust and stay committed to His will, even if we don't see the big picture. A lot of times when God instructs us and leads us into things, He just tells us step by step. He doesn't tell us, okay, if you do this, then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen after this, and this is going to happen, and this is how you're going to handle this, and this is how you're going to handle this next thing and this thing before you get into it. Most of the time, He doesn't do that. Most of the time, He'll give you one instruction. He'll say, do this. You don't know why. You don't have this full explanation. You don't know exactly what's going to happen if you do that. But that's what you've got to have, that trust and that faith to say, okay, God, I know you want me to do this thing. I'll do it. And then as you take that first step, he gives you the next instruction. And as you take that step, he'll give you the next instruction. You know, that's why it's called walking by faith. You take one step at a time, one step in faith, another step in faith, another step in faith, and you're walking in faith. And that's, you know, how we stay committed to the will of God. As we say, okay, God, I might not see the big picture. I might not fully understand everything involving this particular instruction that you've given me. You know, it may be new, it may be scary, I may still be learning in this area, but I'm going to trust you and I'm going to grow. And don't be scared to make mistakes. You know, as you're learning to trust in God and as you're learning to walk in his will for your life and as you're learning to stay committed to his word and to his will, don't be scared if you mess up. You know, don't be scared if you fall. Like if you're learning to ride a bicycle, you know, you might fall off a few times when you're first learning until you get it down packed, and then it becomes easier and easier and easier. But you've got to start somewhere. So don't let the fear of failure or the fear of missing it cause you to never step out and cause you to lose faith and not trust in God. You know, don't be someone who says, God, I won't do what you tell me to do until I know everything about it, or until you do this and 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 all this stuff is taken care of. Because I can guarantee you, if you have that attitude, you're never going to leave the starting line. You're going to be stuck right on the starting line because you're never going to move until you know everything there is to know. No, we've got to trust God and walk in faith based off the instruction he's given us. And then if we continue, it says in 1 Corinthians 9, 26 through 27, and it says, "Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified." So we must have self-discipline. In order to stay committed to the will of God for your life, in order to stay committed to the Word, we have to have self-discipline. It's something we have to develop in and of ourselves. You're not going to have somebody around you all the time that's encouraging you to do what God's called you to do. You're not going to have somebody around you all the time, you know, poking you with a little prodder and saying, don't forget to do this, we've got to do this, you got to stay committed, you know God's will for you, so you got to do it. You know, you're not always going to have somebody cheering you on. And when those situations come, do you have the self-discipline to continue to do it? Do you have the self-discipline to persevere when persecution comes? Do you have the self-discipline to stay committed when hardships arises, when difficulties come? You know, when people around you, sometimes people around you may not even encourage what you're doing or may talk bad about it or be like, well, you don't need to be doing that. I think this and this and this and this. Do you have the commitment and do you have the self-discipline that despite all of that, you will continue to move forward no matter what happens, no matter what tragedy hits, no matter what persecution comes, no matter what people say, but to say, I'm going to stay committed and I'm going to follow God's plan for my life. I'm going to stay in his will because I fully trust in him and in the purpose he has for me. You know, so we've got to be able to come to that place in our lives that we can stand in that discipline, and that's how you can see the will of God be fulfilled in your life. So the last key to seeing the will of God fulfilled in your life is staying committed to it, searching it out, finding it, understanding it, and once you have it, stay committed. And don't let things take you off path, you know, take you off the path or take you out. And if you did notice sometime in your life where you did miss it or you did stop or you're like, oh man, I did quit running, then get back in the race. It's not too late. As long as there's breath in your lungs, it's not too late to get back into the will of God, to get back into the things that he has for you so you can accomplish his will for your life. So, you know, I really hope this encouraged you guys. And, you know, I want you to, you know, to take it in your hearts too, to say, you know what, I'm going to take this time and I'm going to commit myself to God. Maybe it's something as simple as committing to coming to church every single Sunday. Maybe you're an individual and you've never gone to church, or you go to church once or twice a year, or, you know, once or twice a month, but you're never consistent with even attending church services. Change that. Start there. Say, you know what, I'm going to start here and I'm going to come to church every single Sunday. I'm going to be at every single church service. I'll make a commitment to be there. And when you start making those commitments, you'll see the will of God begin to operate in your life. You'll be able to see His blessings pour out upon you. You'll be able to see His provisions pour out upon you. And you'll be walking and achieving things that you've never done before. And again, I want to thank you guys so much for listening today, and God bless.